Have you ever walked away from a conversation replaying someone's harsh words in your mind, feeling that sting linger like a shadow? Maybe it was a casual remark from a coworker, a dismissive comment online, or even well-meaning feedback that left you questioning yourself. Criticism, whether fair or unfair, has a way of shaking our confidence, making us defensive, or worse, making us doubt our own worth. But what if there was a way to face criticism without losing your calm, without letting it chip away at your self-assurance? That's where Stoicism comes in, a philosophy forged in the fires of adversity, designed to help us navigate life's challenges with unshakable clarity. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." Think about that for a second. We let the judgments of others, often strangers, carry more weight than our own sense of purpose. Stoicism flips that script. It teaches us to focus not on controlling what others say, but on mastering how we respond. This video isn't just about enduring criticism, it's about transforming it into fuel for growth. Imagine standing firm in your values, undisturbed by outside noise, because you've built an inner resilience that no insult can penetrate. That's the power of Stoic practice. We'll explore timeless principles from thinkers like Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, breaking down actionable steps to help you respond to criticism with poise, not panic. You'll learn how to separate useful feedback from meaningless noise, how to disarm harsh words with logic rather than emotion, and most importantly, how to cultivate a mindset where your confidence comes from within, not from the approval of others. By the end of this journey, you'll have a toolkit to face criticism not as a threat, but as an opportunity to refine your character, strengthen your resolve, and move through the world with unwavering calm. Because here's the truth, criticism will always exist, but your reaction, that's entirely up to you. So let's dive in and discover how Stoicism can help you turn one of life's most common challenges into one of your greatest strengths. To understand criticism through a Stoic lens, we first need to recognize a fundamental truth. Criticism, no matter how harsh or unfair, is just an external event, an indifferent. It's not inherently good or bad. What gives it power is how we choose to interpret it. The Stoics divided the world into two categories: things we control and things we don't. Our thoughts, actions, and responses, those are ours to command. But the words, opinions, and judgments of others, those belong entirely to them. Epictetus, the former slave-turned-philosopher, put it bluntly: if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. Think about that. The insult itself has no weight unless we pick it up and carry it. This is where the dichotomy of control becomes our most powerful tool. When criticism comes your way, ask yourself, is this within my control? The answer is almost always no. You can't force someone to retract their words or change their opinion. But you can control whether you let those words define you. Imagine criticism as a gust of wind. It might ruffle your clothes, but it doesn't have to knock you down unless you allow it. The Stoics didn't see criticism as a threat. They saw it as a test, a chance to practice patience, to strengthen self-awareness, and to refine your character. Marcus Aurelius faced relentless criticism as emperor, yet he wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice." In other words, the most powerful response isn't defensiveness or anger, it's unshakable integrity. So how do we apply this? Start by pausing before reacting. When criticism lands, take a breath and ask, is there truth here worth considering? If so, it's a gift, a chance to grow. If not, it's just noise, and noise deserves no more attention than the hum of a distant highway. The goal isn't to become indifferent to others, but to build a confidence so rooted in your own principles that no outside voice can destabilize it. Because here's the secret Stoics knew: when you stop depending on external validation, you become untouchable. Not because you're perfect, but because you've learned to separate what's useful from what's meaningless. And that's how criticism, instead of chipping away at you, becomes the whetstone that sharpens your resolve. What if criticism wasn't something to fear, but an opportunity to see yourself more clearly? The Stoics believed that the sting of harsh words comes not from the words themselves, but from how we choose to perceive them. Seneca, one of history's greatest Stoic thinkers, wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality." That's the key. Our perception shapes our pain. Picture someone criticizing your work. Your first instinct might be to recoil, to defend, to take it personally. But what if instead you paused and asked, "Is there a seed of truth here? Can this help me improve?" That shift in perception transforms criticism from a weapon into a tool. Stoics practice what they called prosoch, a habit of mindful attention to their judgments. When criticism comes their way, they don't react impulsively. They step back and examine it with calm detachment, like a scientist studying a specimen. Imagine you're a Stoic sage for a moment. Someone says your project is flawed. Instead of bristling, you'd ask, "Is this feedback accurate? If so, how can I use it to grow? If not, why does it bother me?" This simple reframing drains the emotional charge and leaves you with clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been." That's the power of perception. It turns obstacles into stepping stones. Here's a practical exercise to train this mindset. The next time you face criticism, take a sheet of paper and divide it into 2 columns. On one side, write the critique exactly as it was given. On the other, write how a Stoic sage might interpret it objectively without ego. Maybe that harsh comment about your presentation isn't an attack, but a sign that you need to clarify your points. Maybe that dismissive remark from a colleague isn't about your worth, but their own frustration. The goal isn't to dismiss all criticism, but to filter it through reason rather than emotion. Seneca famously said, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." Criticism, when perceived rightly, is that friction, the grit that smooths our rough edges. The Stoics didn't avoid criticism, they welcomed it as a mirror held up to their progress. Because when you stop seeing critique as a threat to your ego and start seeing it as data for growth, something remarkable happens. You stop fearing judgment and start valuing truth. And that's how perception, that quiet inner lens, becomes your greatest shield against the noise of the world. One of the most transformative Stoic practices is learning to insert space between criticism and your reaction, that crucial pause where emotion doesn't dictate your response. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire amid constant scrutiny, kept a private journal not to vent his frustrations but to examine them. He'd write things like, "Why are you troubled?" The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. That's the essence of detachment, treating criticism not as a personal affront, but as raw material for self-improvement. Picture this: someone speaks harshly to you. Instead of firing back or shrinking inward, you take a mental step back, as if observing the scene from a balcony above. From that vantage point, the words lose their sharp edges. They're just sounds in the air, not arrows aimed at your worth. This practice, what the Stoics called apatheia, not apathy but freedom from destructive passions, is like training yourself to see criticism as weather. A storm cloud doesn't target you personally. It simply exists, and you choose whether to let it ruin your day or wait for it to pass. Epictetus advised his students to approach insults as they would a barking dog. The noise isn't about you, it's the dog's nature to bark, just as it's human nature for some to criticize. The power lies in your decision to keep walking without flinching. Try this visualization next time criticism comes your way. Imagine the words written on a leaf floating down a river or etched into a cloud drifting across the sky. You see them clearly, but they don't stick to you. They're separate from your core, like background noise in a crowded room. Marcus Aurelius perfected this through journaling. Each night, he'd dissect his day with cold rationality, asking, "What disturbed my peace? Was it the event itself or my judgment of it?" That daily habit rewired his reflexes, so when criticism came, he didn't react, he reflected. You can build this muscle too. Start small. The next time someone offers unsolicited feedback, resist the urge to justify or argue. Simply say, "I'll consider that." Then later, in quiet moments, ask yourself, was there value here? If yes, absorb it without shame. If no, discard it without resentment. This isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about mastering them. Because when you stop conflating criticism with your identity, you gain something far more valuable than approval: the unshakable calm of knowing who you are, regardless of what anyone says. The Stoics had a radical idea. What if, instead of resisting criticism, you learn to love it? Not in a masochistic way, but as a necessary force, like the resistance that strengthens a muscle. They called this Amor, Fati, the love of fate. It's the practice of embracing everything life throws at you, not just the pleasant parts, because every experience, even the painful ones, shapes who you become. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle becomes the way." Criticism, then, isn't a detour on your path, it is the path. Centuries later, Friedrich Nietzsche would echo this with his famous phrase, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger." But here's the twist: it's not about enduring criticism, it's about actively welcoming it as fuel for your evolution. Think of your harshest critic for a moment. What if their words, however blunt or unkind, contained a hidden gift? Maybe that coworker who nitpicks your reports is unintentionally sharpening your attention to detail. Maybe the online troll who mocks your passion is teaching you to stand firmer in your convictions. The Stoics would say these aren't nuisances to tolerate, they're teachers in disguise. Epictetus, who endured slavery before becoming a philosopher, put it plainly: every difficulty in life presents us with an opportunity to turn inward and to invoke our own submerged inner resources. In other words, criticism doesn't reveal your weaknesses, it reveals where you still tie your worth to others' opinions. So how do you practice Amor Fati with criticism? Start by reframing your internal narrative. Instead of thinking, "This person is trying to tear me down," ask, "What can I learn here?" Imagine criticism as a strict but brilliant coach, one who doesn't coddle you, but pushes you to exceed your own expectations. When Nietzsche spoke of loving fate, he meant embracing life's entirety, the bitter and the sweet, because both are essential to growth. Your critics, knowingly or not, are collaborators in your resilience. They're the whetstone against which you hone your character. Here's a challenge: the next time someone critiques you, pause and say silently, "Thank you for this opportunity to grow." You don't have to agree with them, you don't even have to like them, but by choosing gratitude over resistance, you reclaim the power they unknowingly handed you. Because when you stop seeing criticism as something to fear and start seeing it as part of your fate, something to love not in spite of but because of its difficulty, you unlock a profound truth. The people who seem to oppose you might just be the ones who help you rise. There's an underrated strength in silence, a Stoic superpower few truly master. Picture this: someone hurls an insult your way, and instead of firing back, you meet their words with calm stillness. Not out of weakness, but because you've chosen not to hand them the reins to your emotions. Epictetus put it bluntly: when someone tries to drag you into a foolish argument, remember, silence isn't just the absence of words. It's the presence of self-control. Think about that. Every time you resist the urge to engage with petty criticism, you're not losing the battle. You're winning the war for your own peace of mind. History's most composed leaders understood this. Nelson Mandela, after 27 years in prison, faced relentless criticism upon his release, yet he rarely retaliated publicly. He knew that reacting to every provocation would only dilute his message and exhaust his spirit. Instead, he modeled what the Stoics called hesychia, a deliberate, purposeful quiet that speaks louder than any clapback. Modern leaders like Jacinda Ardern exemplify this too. When faced with baseless attacks, she often responds with measured silence, then action, proving that restraint isn't passivity, it's strategy. Here's the Stoic secret: silence isn't about suppressing your voice. It's about refusing to let criticism dictate your rhythm. Imagine two people arguing in a crowded room. The angrier one becomes the more the crowd watches not the content of their words, but the spectacle of their loss of control. Now picture the other person standing still, listening, then walking away without a word. Who commands respect? The Stoics would say the real power lies not in the last word, but in the unshaken resolve to choose your battles wisely. Try this experiment next time criticism feels personal. Pause for 10 seconds before responding, or don't respond at all. Use that space to ask yourself, will engaging here serve any purpose? Will it change minds or just feed the drama? Often, the most impactful reply is no reply, because silence does something remarkable. It forces the critic to sit with their own words, while you remain untethered to their chaos. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." Your silence isn't an empty space, it's the foundation of your unshakable calm. The Stoics had a powerful exercise called Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. It sounds ominous, but it's actually one of the most liberating tools for handling criticism. Here's how it works. Instead of dreading harsh words or waiting anxiously for someone's disapproval, you deliberately imagine the worst they could say, and then dismantle its power in advance. Picture this: before walking into a meeting where you're presenting an idea, you take a moment to ask yourself, what's the harshest feedback I might receive? Not to dwell on it, but to expose it to the light of reason. When you do this, something remarkable happens. The criticism loses its surprise, and with it, its sting. This practice isn't about pessimism, it's about inoculation. Think of it like a vaccine, a small, controlled dose of the virus to build immunity. Seneca used this technique daily. He'd visualize insults, setbacks, even betrayals, not to dwell on misery, but to rehearse his calm response. He wrote, "He who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." Let's apply this to criticism. Imagine your coworker dismisses your project in front of the team. Instead of freezing or lashing out, you've already played this scenario in your mind. You've asked yourself, if they say it's unoriginal or flawed, does that make it true? Does their opinion erase my effort or my growth? The answer, of course, is no. By preemptively separating the criticism from your self-worth, you build a firewall between their words and your peace. Here's how to practice this today. Set aside 5 minutes to mentally walk through a situation where you might face criticism. Visualize the words being spoken, really hear them. Then, like a Stoic philosopher, interrogate them. Is this critique valid? If so, how can I use it? If not, why does it bother me? This isn't about suppressing emotion. it's about understanding it. Marcus Aurelius did this every morning, preparing for the day's challenges by asking, what could go wrong and how will I stay anchored in my principles? That's the key. When you've already examined the worst-case scenario, it can't ambush you. The beauty of Premeditatio Malorum is that it flips the script on criticism. Instead of fearing it, you become curious about it. You start to see it as a test of your resilience, a chance to practice what the Stoics called apatheia, not apathy, but emotional clarity. Because when you've already faced the worst in your mind, the actual words lose their fangs. They become data, not daggers. And that's how you transform criticism from something that shakes you into something that strengthens you, one deliberate, unshaken thought at a time. Journaling was Marcus Aurelius' secret weapon against the chaos of criticism, a practice he used not to dwell on insults, but to dissolve their power. Every night by candlelight, he'd open his personal diary and confront the day's challenges with unflinching honesty. He didn't vent emotions onto the page, he dissected them, asking one relentless question: where does the truth lie? This is the heart of Stoic journaling, a way to strip criticism down to its bare bones, separating the useful from the useless. Imagine someone says your work is sloppy. A raw emotional reaction might spiral into self-doubt or defensiveness, but a Stoic approach transforms that moment into a laboratory for growth. Grab a notebook and divide the critique into 3 simple columns. What was said? What's true? What can I learn? Start with the facts. Write the criticism word for word, like a court stenographer recording testimony. No embellishments, no interpretations, just the raw statement. This step alone creates distance, turning a heated moment into an object you can examine coldly. Next, the crucial filter: what's true? Maybe the comment about rushed deadlines hits home because you've been stretched thin. Or perhaps the jab about your presentation style reveals a genuine area for improvement. Be ruthlessly objective here. The Stoics called this hypolepsis, the discipline of withholding judgment until you've scrutinized the evidence. Finally, the pivot to empowerment: what can I learn? Even baseless criticism often holds a mirror to our insecurities. If a remark stings, ask why. Is it touching a nerve of self-doubt you haven't addressed? That's where the gold lies. Marcus Aurelius modeled this in his Meditations, writing lines like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." His journal wasn't a confessional, it was a workshop for refining his character. Try this tonight. Take one piece of criticism you've received recently and put it through the 3-question template. You might discover that what felt like an attack is actually a roadmap, a signpost pointing you toward your next level of growth. Because when you journal like a Stoic, you're not just recording words, you're reclaiming the narrative. Every page becomes proof that criticism doesn't define you, your response does. Here's the unexpected benefit of this practice. Over time, you'll start to crave criticism, not fear it. Why? Because you've trained your mind to see it as raw material for self-mastery. Seneca wrote his letters not to complain about his detractors, but to thank them for showing him where his armor was weak. Your journal can serve the same purpose. Think of it as a mental sieve, catching the nuggets of truth while letting the empty noise wash away. And here's the real shift. When you make this a habit, you'll notice something profound. The voices of critics grow quieter, while your own voice, clear, unshaken, rooted in reason, grows louder. That's the Stoics' ultimate victory, not silencing the world, but turning up the volume on your own wisdom. History offers us remarkable Stoic role models who faced blistering criticism with unshakable composure. Figures who didn't just endure scorn, but transformed it into a testament of their character. Take Cato the Younger, the Roman senator whose integrity was so unyielding that even his enemies respected him. When political rivals mocked his stubborn adherence to principle, calling him rigid or out of touch, he didn't waver. Instead, he leaned into his convictions, famously saying, "I begin to speak only when I'm certain what I'll say isn't better left unsaid." Imagine that level of self-possession, where criticism doesn't make you question yourself but reaffirms your commitment to truth. Cato's strength wasn't in silencing his critics, it was in rendering their words irrelevant by living so fully in alignment with his values that their opinions couldn't touch him. Then there's Seneca, the philosopher who advised emperors yet faced constant backlash, accused of hypocrisy, greed, even treason. His response: to write letters dissecting the nature of criticism itself. In one, he quipped, "A man who fears criticism will never do anything noteworthy." Seneca didn't just tolerate detractors, he studied them, recognizing that their words revealed more about their own insecurities than his flaws. When Nero's courtiers spread rumors about him, Seneca doubled down on his teachings, urging his students to ask, "Does this criticism hold a mirror to my actions, or is it merely smoke meant to obscure?" His ability to separate signal from noise, to mine even malicious words for useful feedback, turned criticism into a refining fire. Consider the modern parallels. Think of figures like Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and later faced skeptics dismissing his logotherapy as simplistic, or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who endured decades of condescension in a male-dominated legal world, only to respond with meticulous arguments that reshaped history. These weren't people who lacked feelings, they were individuals who channeled their emotional energy into something greater than defensiveness. They embodied the Stoic ideal. Criticism isn't personal, it's a force to be met with curiosity or indifference, never fear. So who inspires you? Maybe it's a historical figure like Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire while being ridiculed behind his back, yet wrote in his private journal, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." Or perhaps it's someone in your life, a mentor, a parent, a colleague who faces unfair judgment with quiet dignity. Whoever it is, their example holds a key. The moment you stop needing critics to approve of you is the moment you become unstoppable. Because the real power of Stoic role models isn't in their perfection, it's in their refusal to let anyone else dictate their self-worth. They remind us that criticism, like wind or rain, is just weather. And weather never lasts. What if every critic, even the harsh ones, were secretly training you for greatness? Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who compared life to a wrestling match, had a radical way of reframing criticism. He said, when someone criticizes you, think of them as a sparring partner in the gymnasium of the mind. Picture that every critique, every barbed comment is like a new exercise designed to strengthen your resilience, your clarity, your emotional endurance. The gymnasium isn't a place of punishment, it's where athletes transform, and your critics, they're the coaches you never hired but who show up anyway, pushing you harder than you might push yourself. This shift in perspective turns the entire dynamic on its head. Instead of dreading criticism, you start to see it as resistance training for your character. Think about how muscles grow. They need tension, challenge, even discomfort. Your mind works the same way. When someone points out a flaw in your work, they're handing you a weight to lift. It might feel heavy at first, but lifting it repeatedly is what builds strength. Marcus Aurelius had his own version of this. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In other words, the very thing that seems like an obstacle, the critic, the naysayer, is actually the path forward if you know how to use them. Here's how to put this into practice. Take a recent piece of criticism you've received, even something small. Maybe a friend said you interrupt too much, or a manager noted your report lacked detail. Now, instead of reacting defensively, ask, what's the lesson here? Not, is this person right? But, if I treat this as feedback from a tough but well-meaning coach, what can I improve? Sometimes the lesson isn't in the content of the critique, but in how you handle it. That coworker who always nitpicks your ideas, they're teaching you patience. The online troll who mocks your passion, they're training you in detachment. Even the most unfair criticism holds a hidden curriculum if you're willing to enroll. Epictetus took this further. He taught that the best response to criticism isn't agreement or defiance, it's curiosity. Imagine your critic as a philosopher in disguise, handing you a puzzle to solve. Their words might be clumsy or unkind, but buried in them is a question. Can you separate the message from the messenger? Can you find the truth without needing the other person to be right or wrong? This is the Stoic art of extracting value from everything, even the things that initially feel worthless. Like a miner sifting through rubble for gold, you learn to pan for insight in every critique. So here's a challenge. Think of one critic in your life, past or present. Maybe it's a family member who always doubts your choices, or an internet stranger who left a cutting comment. Now write down one thing they've criticized you for, and next to it complete this sentence. This person unintentionally is teaching me to, maybe it's, to communicate more clearly, or to trust myself despite disapproval. That's the real power of the Stoic gymnasium. The critics don't get to decide whether you grow stronger. Only you do. And every time you choose to see their words as weights to lift rather than wounds to nurse, you're not just surviving criticism. You're using it to sculpt a version of yourself that no amount of disapproval can shake. Imagine standing in the eye of a storm, wind howling, chaos swirling around you, yet at your core there's stillness. That's what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel, an unshakable fortress of self-awareness where external noise fades and only your own judgment matters. He wrote, "You have a mind, yes. Well, why not use it? Isn't that all you need to keep it from whining, whatever happens?" That's the essence of controlling your inner dialogue, recognizing that while you can't silence the critics outside, you hold absolute authority over the critic within. The Stoics understood that self-doubt isn't planted by others, it's watered by our own repetitive thoughts. Every time you replay someone's harsh words, you're not just recalling their voice, you're amplifying it with your own. Epictetus warned, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgments about them." Think about that. The sting of criticism lingers not because of what was said, but because of the story we tell ourselves about it. Maybe you heard, "Your idea won't work," and silently added, "Because I'm not good enough." That's the real battleground, the space between what's said and how you interpret it. Here's how to reclaim that space. When criticism lands, pause and ask one simple question. Does this align with my values? Not, is this true? Or, do they like me? But, does this resonate with who I aspire to be? Picture a sculptor chiseling a block of marble. Every strike of criticism is like a hammer tap. Some will reveal the masterpiece within. Others will miss the mark entirely. Your values are the chisel, guiding which blows to heed and which to let glance off. Marcus Aurelius modeled this daily. As emperor, he faced relentless scrutiny, yet his private journals reveal a man more concerned with his own standards than public opinion. "It never ceases to amaze me," he wrote, "how we value our own minds less than the minds of others. Try this reframe the next time self-doubt creeps in. Instead of asking, 'What if they're right?' ask, 'What would my best self do with this?' Your best self might extract a grain of truth from the critique and discard the rest. Your best self might recognize that the criticism says more about the other person's perspective than your worth. This isn't about building arrogance, it's about cultivating discernment." The Stoics didn't advocate ignoring all feedback. They taught us to filter it through the lens of our principles. Consider the inner citadel not as a wall to hide behind, but as a vantage point. From there, you can observe criticism without being consumed by it. Imagine standing on a mountain, watching storm clouds roll in below. The weather rages, but you're above it, untouched. That's the power of mastering your inner dialogue. When you stop outsourcing your self-worth to others and start anchoring it in your own values, criticism transforms. It's no longer a verdict, it's just information. And information, as the Stoics knew, is only as powerful as what you choose to do with it. There's a quiet strength in admitting you don't have all the answers, a paradox the Stoics understood deeply. True confidence isn't about pretending to be flawless. It's about embracing the fact that you're always evolving. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, put it beautifully: no man was ever wise by chance. Wisdom comes from recognizing our gaps, not hiding them. That's Stoic humility, the kind of self-assurance that doesn't crumble under criticism because it's rooted in the honesty of being a work in progress. Picture a master sculptor halfway through a statue. They don't rage when someone points out an uneven edge. They nod and keep chiseling. That's the mindset shift. Criticism isn't an attack on your finished self, but feedback on the masterpiece you're still creating. This humility becomes your shield against defensiveness. When someone critiques you, instead of bracing for battle, try this counterintuitive move: thank them. Not as a passive surrender, but as an active choice to mine their words for gold. Seneca wrote, "Men learn while they teach." Could your critic, even unintentionally, be offering you a lesson? Maybe that harsh comment about your leadership style reveals a blind spot in communication. Maybe the dismissive remark about your project highlights a need for clearer vision. Humility doesn't mean accepting every critique as truth. It means having the courage to ask, is there something here that could make me better? Consider the ancient Stoics' practice of circumspection, literally looking around. They'd intentionally seek out critical perspectives, not to punish themselves, but to widen their view. Imagine applying this today. After a presentation, you might ask a colleague, "What's one thing I could improve?" Not fishing for praise, but inviting constructive friction. The key is detachment. You're not collecting opinions to define your worth, but gathering data to refine your craft. Marcus Aurelius modeled this as emperor, writing, "If anyone can refute me, I'll gladly change, for I seek the truth by which no one was ever harmed." That's humility in action, a confidence so secure it welcomes correction. Here's the unexpected twist. When you stop resisting criticism with defensiveness, you disarm it. Think of a martial artist using an opponent's momentum to regain balance. Your critic expects you to flinch or fight back, but when you respond with calm gratitude, "I appreciate you sharing that perspective," you shift the dynamic entirely. Suddenly, their words lose the power to unsettle you. Why? Because you've already agreed with the core Stoic premise. You're not perfect, and that's not a weakness. It's the starting point of growth. Try this reframe the next time criticism stings. Picture yourself holding two boxes. One is labeled, "Things I know." The other, "Things I'm learning." Most of life belongs in the second box, and that's not just okay, it's liberating. Seneca reminded us even Socrates, the wisest of Athenians, claimed to know only one thing, that he knew nothing. That radical humility didn't diminish his confidence, it fueled it. Because when you stop pretending to have all the answers, you free yourself to explore better ones. So the next time criticism comes, take a breath and try the Stoic's secret weapon. Smile, say thank you, and ask yourself not, "How dare they?" but "What if they're partly right?" That shift alone will make you untouchable, not because you're immune to feedback, but because you've learned to let it lift you rather than knock you down. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, didn't just face criticism, he let it reroute his entire life. Picture this: a wealthy merchant, shipwrecked and stranded in Athens, wandering into a bookstore where he overhears philosophers mocking his lack of education. Instead of slinking away in shame, Zeno leans in. He asks questions, studies under their guidance, and eventually builds his own school of thought, one that would outlast empires. That's the Stoic alchemy in action, taking the raw material of ridicule and forging it into a legacy. The same people who laughed at him became the catalyst for his transformation. This is the heart of turning criticism into fuel, not just enduring it, but allowing it to propel you forward. The Stoics had a term for this: antifragility. It's the idea that some things don't just withstand chaos, they thrive because of it. Think of a bone that heals stronger after a break, or a forest that grows denser after a fire. Criticism, when met with the right mindset, works the same way. It doesn't just test your resilience, it builds it. When Epictetus said, "Difficulties show men what they are," he wasn't glorifying suffering, he was pointing out its hidden curriculum. Every harsh word, every skeptical glance is an invitation to ask, what does this reveal about where I need to grow? Here's how to practice this today. The next time someone dismisses your idea or mocks your effort, pause and flip the script. Ask yourself, if this critique were a challenge rather than an insult, how would I rise to meet it? Maybe that coworker who rolls their eyes at your proposal is pushing you to refine your pitch. Maybe the relative who questions your career path is inadvertently strengthening your resolve. Zeno didn't just absorb the philosopher's mockery. He used it as a mirror, confronting his own gaps in knowledge with brutal honesty. That's the pivot point. Criticism becomes useful the moment you stop asking, "Are they right?" and start asking, "How can this make me better?" Consider the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, making the cracks more beautiful than the original surface. That's what the Stoics did with criticism. They didn't hide the fractures, they highlighted them as proof of growth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle becomes the way," but he might as well have said, "The critic becomes the coach." Because when you stop seeing detractors as adversaries and start seeing them as unwitting mentors, something shifts. Their words lose the power to wound and gain the power to refine. So here's your challenge. Pick one piece of criticism you've resisted. Maybe it's been sitting with you for days, weeks, even years. Now, imagine it's not an attack but a dare. How would Zeno respond? Not with defensiveness but with curiosity. Not with shame but with action. Because the secret isn't to avoid criticism. It's to let it sand down your rough edges until you shine. After all, the same friction that wears down stone also polishes diamonds. The question is, which will you choose to be? Stoicism teaches us that not all criticism deserves our attention. Some is wheat, some is chaff, and wisdom lies in knowing the difference. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who faced exile with unshaken resolve, put it bluntly, "We should value the truth above all else, even if it comes from an enemy, and reject falsehood, even if it comes from a friend." That's the essence of selective listening, separating the signal from the static, not based on who's speaking, but on what's being said. Imagine holding up a sieve to every critique, letting through only what aligns with your virtues, your growth, while letting the rest fall away. Here's the practical filter Stoics use. Ask yourself, does this feedback serve my character or just my ego? Picture two types of criticism. One says, "Your presentation lacked data. Here's where the numbers fell short." The other snaps, "You're just bad at public speaking." The first is specific, actionable, aimed at your work. The second is vague, personal, aimed at your identity. The Stoics would say the first is worth weighing, the second worth dismissing. Why? Because virtue, excellence of character, thrives on constructive friction, not petty jabs. Epictetus advised his students to treat useless criticism like background noise in a bustling marketplace, noticeable but not worthy of engagement. Try this exercise next time criticism comes your way. Visualize a scale. On one side, place the critique itself. On the other, place your core values: integrity, growth, resilience. Does the criticism tip the balance toward improvement, or does it tilt toward distraction? Marcus Aurelius used this mental model daily. When his advisors flattered him, he'd ask, "Is this true?" When rivals scorned him, he'd ask, "Is this useful?" His journal reveals the clarity that followed. It's ridiculous not to flee from your own corruption, yet readily flee from another's. The first is your duty, the second isn't even possible. The art of selective listening isn't about arrogance, it's about precision. Think of a chef tasting a dish mid-preparation. They don't accept every bit of feedback as equal. They discern which spices will enhance the meal and which will overwhelm it. Your growth works the same way. That coworker who nitpicks your formatting, maybe they're helping you polish professionalism. The internet stranger who mocks your voice, that's just static. The Stoic skill is in knowing when to lean in and when to walk away. Musonius Rufus faced this test when Roman authorities banished him to a barren island. His critics thought exile would silence him. Instead, he turned it into a classroom, teaching students who sailed there to learn. His secret: he'd long stopped measuring his worth by others' approval. "If you seek truth," he said, "you'll find it not in the crowd's applause, but in the quiet of your own judgment. That's the ultimate filter, not 'do they like me?'" But is this true? When you master that shift, criticism loses its power to derail you and gains the power to refine you. So the next time words come your way, don't just listen. Ask not whether they sting, but whether they shine a light, because the Stoics knew what we often forget. The right criticism from the right source at the right time isn't an obstacle. It's a gift, one that demands nothing but your willingness to sift wisely. Socrates stood in the Athenian marketplace, surrounded by laughter. Young men mocked his bare feet and plain cloak, calling him a gadfly for questioning their beliefs. Instead of shrinking or retaliating, he smiled and asked, "If a donkey kicks you, would you kick it back?" The crowd fell silent. This moment captures the essence of Stoic composure, turning ridicule into a lesson without losing dignity. Socrates didn't just endure public criticism, he demonstrated prosauch, the Stoic practice of sustained attention. His focus wasn't on the insults hurled at him, but on the integrity of his own actions. Imagine applying that same unwavering focus today, when a social media post goes viral for all the wrong reasons, or a colleague undermines you in a team meeting. The principle remains timeless. Mastery lies not in controlling others' words, but in directing your own attention. Let's break down how this works. Sustained attention isn't about ignoring criticism, it's about consciously choosing where to place your mental energy. Picture a spotlight. You can aim it at the jeering crowd, or you can train it on the stage where you're performing. The Stoics called this tonos, a deliberate tightening of focus, like a musician tuning out distractions to hit the right note. When someone mocks your idea in a brainstorming session, you have two choices: obsess over their tone or refine your concept. The first drains you, the second strengthens you. Epictetus, who faced constant ridicule as a disabled former slave, put it plainly: the more we value things outside our control, the less control we have. Now let's role-play a modern scenario. Suppose you've shared a project online and a stranger comments, "This is the dumbest take I've seen all year." Your instinct might be to fire back or delete the post in shame, but channel Socrates, pause, ask, "What part of my attention does this deserve?" The content of the critique. 0, it's empty vitriol, but your response, that's where the spotlight belongs. A Stoic might reply, "I'm open to thoughtful criticism if you'd like to elaborate," or simply say nothing. Both options maintain power because they refuse to let the critic dictate the terms of engagement. Marcus Aurelius described this as the art of acquiescence, accepting that others will speak, while reserving the right to choose whether their words matter. Here's the subtle shift that changes everything. Criticism only destabilizes you if you meet it on its own chaotic level. But when you respond from a place of calm focus, when you act rather than react, you reveal the weakness of the attack. Think of a tree in a storm. The wind howls, the branches sway, but the roots hold firm. Your roots are your values, your attention, your commitment to growth. Socrates drank hemlock rather than betray his principles, not because he sought martyrdom, but because he knew no insult could outweigh his inner truth. That's the ultimate Stoic victory, not the absence of criticism, but the presence of unshakable focus. When you master sustained attention, you don't just survive public scrutiny, you transcend it. Try this today. The next time criticism comes, big or small, picture yourself holding two buckets. One is labeled "their words," the other "my focus." Pour your energy into the second bucket and watch how quickly the first one empties of its power. Because composure isn't about silencing the world. It's about hearing the noise and choosing, with quiet intention, what deserves your attention. And that choice, as Socrates showed us, is where true strength resides. Forgiveness in Stoicism isn't about excusing poor behavior, it's about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment. Marcus Aurelius, who faced betrayal and slander as emperor, wrote, "When people injure you, ask yourself what good or harm they thought would come of it." If you understand that, you'll feel sympathy rather than outrage. That's the Stoic twist. The person criticizing you isn't some villain in your story. They're likely acting from ignorance, insecurity, or their own unresolved pain. Picture someone hurling insults from a sinking boat. Do you jump in to argue, or recognize they're drowning in their own turmoil? The Stoics chose the latter. They understood that holding onto anger toward critics is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to get sick. Think about the last time someone's criticism stuck with you. How much mental space did it consume? Replayed conversations, imagined comebacks, simmering frustration. All energy siphoned from things that actually matter. Epictetus framed it bluntly. Any person capable of angering you becomes your master. When you cling to grievances, you hand over the reins of your peace to the very people who disrupted it. Now imagine cutting that cord, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve freedom. Seneca, who endured exile and political attacks, wrote letters advising his friends to treat adversity like a hair in your soup, annoying, but not worth ruining the meal. That's the Stoic art of emotional economy, investing your energy where it yields growth, not grudges. Here's the practical shift. Next time you recall a cutting remark, ask yourself, is this memory serving me or imprisoning me? Picture the critic as a passerby shouting directions to a destination they've never visited. Their words might be loud, but that doesn't make them a guide. Marcus Aurelius journaled this reminder: the best revenge is to not be like your enemy. By refusing to mirror their pettiness, you reclaim power. You're not dismissing their words, you're refusing to let those words dictate your inner world. Consider the Japanese art of shogunai. It can't be helped. Some criticism stems from circumstances beyond anyone's control. A stressed boss snaps. A stranger projects their bad day onto you. The Stoic response isn't to absorb that energy, but to observe it with detached compassion, like watching a storm through a window. You wouldn't blame the rain for falling. Why blame humans for being human? This mindset doesn't excuse harm, but it prevents that harm from taking root in your psyche. Try this tonight. Write down one critique that still bothers you, then light a match and burn the paper. Safely, of course. Watch the smoke curl upward and dissolve. That's what forgiveness looks like in action. Releasing what no longer nourishes you, not because the critic has changed, but because you've chosen to stop carrying their words. As Marcus Aurelius scribbled in the darkness of his military tent, the opinion of 10,000 men is worthless if none of them know the truth. Your peace is too precious to mortgage to someone else's ignorance. When you forgive, you're not giving them absolution, you're giving yourself the spaciousness to breathe, create, and move forward unburdened. Imagine standing on a mountaintop, looking down at a winding road far below. From that height, the potholes and bumps that seemed so jarring up close now blur into insignificance against the vast landscape. That's the power of temporal distancing, the Stoic practice of examining criticism, sub specie eternitatis, under the lens of eternity. When someone's harsh words land like a punch to the gut, ask yourself, will this sting tomorrow, in a month, a decade from now? Most criticism shrinks when measured against the span of a lifetime. The Roman statesman Cato, when mocked for his old-fashioned cloak, simply replied, "I'd rather be laughed at for my dress than my character." He knew the difference between what's fleeting and what's foundational. Think about the last time criticism kept you up at night. Maybe it was a snide remark from a coworker or a dismissive comment online. Now fast forward, how much does it weigh today? The Stoics called this mental shift premeditatio temporis, premeditating time's passage to drain petty grievances of their power. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. As emperor, he faced constant scrutiny, yet his journals reveal a man who measured his actions against centuries, not headlines. "Soon you'll be ashes or bones," he wrote. A name at most, and even that's just sound and echo. Stark, maybe, but also liberating. When you zoom out, most criticism reveals itself as what it truly is: background noise in the symphony of your growth. Contrast two types of critiques. One attacks your being, you're incompetent. The other addresses your doing. This report needs stronger data. The first evaporates under eternity's gaze. It's too vague to hold weight. The second might linger if it holds truth, but even then, only as a stepping stone. Seneca, exiled for political reasons, wrote to a friend, "Time discovers truth." He didn't mean passive waiting, he meant active perspective. That project your boss called amateurish last year, today, it's either a lesson absorbed or a judgment proven wrong. Temporal distancing isn't about dismissing feedback, it's about calibrating its importance. Here's how to apply this. The next time criticism rattles you, play the long game visualization. Close your eyes and picture yourself 10 years older, looking back at this moment. What would that wiser version say? Likely one of two things: "That criticism helped me grow," or "I can't even remember why it bothered me." Epictetus trained his students to ask, "Will this matter when I'm on my deathbed?" Morbid, perhaps, but also clarifying. The critiques that align with your values will endure as guides. The rest will fade like graffiti washed away by rain. Consider the ancient oak tree in a storm. It doesn't fret over every leaf torn away. It focuses on deepening roots that will outlast seasons. Your character works the same way. Petty criticism is like those lost leaves, inevitable but irrelevant to your long-term strength. Marcus Aurelius put it best: you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say. When eternity is your measuring stick, most criticism doesn't disappear. It just finds its proper size, small enough to step over, light enough to carry if it's useful, and easy enough to leave behind if it's not. Because in the end, what others say about you is temporary. What you build with your life, that echoes. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who endured slavery before teaching emperors, offered a radical defense against criticism. You are not your reputation. Think about that for a moment. The version of you that exists in someone else's mind, their judgments, their labels, their fleeting impressions, that's not who you are. It's a shadow on the wall, not the substance. This is the cornerstone of Stoic self-affirmation, building your sense of worth on traits no critic can touch. Picture a tree rooted so deeply that no storm can topple it. The wind may shake its branches, but the roots remain unbroken. That's the kind of confidence we're cultivating, not the brittle kind that crumbles at the first harsh word, but the kind that stands firm because it's anchored in something real. Here's how to put this into practice. Grab a notebook and draw a vertical line down the center of the page. On the left, write reputation, the things people say about you, the roles you play, the way others perceive you. These are external, changeable, often arbitrary. Now on the right, write character, your honesty, your resilience, your capacity for kindness, the principles you live by when no one's watching. These are internal, unchanging, entirely yours. The Stoic exercise is simple yet profound. Whenever criticism strikes, shift your gaze from the left column to the right. That coworker who called you incompetent, their words live in the first column. Your work ethic, your willingness to learn, your track record of growth. Those belong to the second. One is weather, the other is climate. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. As emperor, he faced constant scrutiny, flattery from sycophants, venom from rivals, yet his private journals reveal a man who measured himself against his own standards. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be, he wrote. Be one. That's the heart of Stoic self-affirmation, action over approval. When you focus on embodying your values rather than defending your image, criticism loses its power to destabilize you. Think of a sculptor who cares more about the integrity of the marble than the crowd's applause. The art becomes its own reward. Now, let's make this tangible. List 5 traits you admire in yourself, not achievements or skills, but enduring qualities. Maybe it's your curiosity, your ability to listen, your refusal to cut corners. These are your Stoic anchors. When criticism lands, hold onto them like lifelines. Epictetus, who was mocked for his lameness and his low birth, would tell his students, if someone calls you a donkey, ignore them. But if you actually bray and kick, maybe listen. That's the balance, neither rejecting all feedback nor internalizing all judgment, but discerning what aligns with the person you're committed to becoming. The beauty of this practice, it turns criticism into a mirror for self-reflection, not self-doubt. When someone's words sting, ask yourself, does this point to a gap between who I am and who I aspire to be? If yes, it's a gift, a chance to close that gap. If no, it's just noise. Seneca, who faced exile and slander, put it best, a man's as miserable as he thinks he is. Your confidence doesn't come from convincing critics they're wrong. It comes from knowing deep down that your worth isn't theirs to define. So the next time criticism shakes you, don't reach for someone else's measuring stick. Reach for your own. Stand like that deeply rooted tree, not impervious to the wind, but unshaken by it, because the ultimate Stoic affirmation isn't, I am flawless. It's, I am growing. And no amount of outside judgment can take that away from you. Seneca warned of coram per turbam, crowd sickness, of that contagious energy where rationality drowns in the roar of the mob. Fast forward 2,000 years, and that sickness thrives in the digital age, where anonymity fuels cruelty and algorithms reward outrage. A single tweet can summon a storm of strangers dissecting your worth in real time. But here's what the Stoics knew. A mind that's easily swayed by online noise is a mind that hasn't built its own walls. Imagine your digital life as a garden. You wouldn't let every passing animal trample your herbs or let weeds choke your flowers. Why let every random comment shape your inner landscape? The difference between ancient Rome and today isn't the existence of critics, it's the scale. Where Seneca faced a jeering crowd in the forum, you face a global amphitheater of disembodied voices. The solution isn't to flee the digital world, but to navigate it with stoic discernment. Start by asking, does this platform cultivate my virtue or my vanity? Twitter debates might feel like intellectual sparring, but are they sharpening your wisdom or just your wit? Instagram likes might stroke your ego, but do they align with your values? Epictetus would have deleted apps that served distraction over growth, just as he avoided Athenian gossip shops. Consider the Stoic scroll test. Before engaging with any online criticism, apply Marcus Aurelius' three-question filter. Is this true? Is this necessary? Is this kind? If a comment fails all three, it's digital debris. Scroll past like you would a pothole on the road. But if it passes even one, pause. Maybe that harsh Reddit critique about your coding project holds a kernel of technical truth. Perhaps the YouTube comment mocking your video's pacing reveals an editing blind spot. The Stoics didn't reject all criticism, they rejected mindless criticism. Curate your digital spaces with the precision of a gardener pruning for sunlight. Unfollow accounts that trade in outrage. Mute keywords that hijack your peace. Create a virtue feed. Follow historians instead of hot-take artists, philosophers instead of provocateurs. When Seneca advised Lucilius to avoid the many, he wasn't advocating isolation, he was urging selective fellowship. Your online world should resemble a Stoic symposium, challenging ideas exchanged with respect, not a gladiator pit where dignity bleeds out for clicks. Here's the ultimate shift. Treat online hate like bad weather. You don't argue with rain, you grab an umbrella. When a troll claims you're ignorant, picture them as a thundercloud, loud but fleeting. Your energy is better spent building mental storm shelters, offline hobbies, face-to-face connections, journals where you define your worth beyond the metrics of strangers. Because the digital age didn't invent cruelty, it just amplified it. The Stoic response remains timeless. Protect your peace like it's the last fertile soil in a desert of noise. Plant your roots where the crowd's chaos can't reach. Epictetus described the mind as a fortress with a single gatekeeper, your faculty of judgment. Before any thought or critique enters, this gatekeeper has the power to ask, should I let this in? The Stoics called this process the discipline of assent, the crucial pause between hearing criticism and accepting it as truth. Imagine someone telling you, your work is mediocre. That statement isn't a fact, it's an interpretation, a passing cloud in the sky of their perception. The Stoic gatekeeper's job isn't to reject all criticism but to scrutinize it. Is this a reflection of reality or just someone's subjective lens? Here's how this works in practice. When criticism comes your way, train yourself to dissect it like a scientist examining data. Take the statement, you're not leadership material. Now separate the observable facts. Maybe you hesitated in a meeting or missed a deadline from the sweeping judgment. Facts are useful, they're signposts for growth. But interpretations, those belong to the person who made them. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, writing, "Don't let the force of an impression break in on you." Say to it, hold on a moment, let me see who you are and what you represent. That momentary pause is where your power lies. Epictetus used a vivid metaphor. Think of your mind as a banquet table. Just because someone hands you a dish doesn't mean you're obligated to eat it. Criticism is the same. You're free to taste it, examine its ingredients, and decide whether it nourishes you or deserves to be pushed aside. Try this exercise next time you receive feedback. Grab a notebook and divide the page into 2 columns. On the left, write the raw critique. Your presentation was confusing. On the right, list only the verifiable facts. I didn't define the acronyms, or the conclusion lacked data. Everything else, the tone, the generalizations, the emotional charge, that's not yours to carry. The beauty of this discipline is that it turns criticism into a dialogue with yourself, not a verdict from others. When Seneca faced attacks from political rivals, he didn't internalize their venom. He asked, what would a wise person see here? Sometimes the answer was nothing, and he'd move on. Other times, he'd find a grain of truth to polish his actions. That's the Stoic balance, neither rejecting all feedback nor swallowing it whole, but chewing it thoughtfully before deciding what to digest. So the next time someone critiques you, picture that gatekeeper at the door of your mind. Let them ask the 2 most liberating questions a Stoic knows. Is this fact or opinion? And does this serve my growth or someone else's narrative? Because assent isn't about agreement, it's about discernment. And in that space between hearing and believing, you'll find the quiet strength of knowing which voices deserve your ear and which deserve nothing more than a nod and a closed door. Marcus Aurelius once observed that people exist to help one another, not to tear each other down. Yet critics often seem to forget this, lashing out with words that feel more like weapons than wisdom. Here's the Stoic twist. Those harsh words usually reveal more about the critic's inner world than your worth. Think of it like this: when someone throws a stone, it's not about where it lands, it's about the tension in their own arm. The Stoics practiced a radical form of empathy, asking not, why are they attacking me, but what pain might be driving their words. Picture a colleague who constantly nitpicks your ideas in meetings. Instead of reacting defensively, consider, are they overcompensating for their own insecurities? Maybe they fear being overshadowed or worry their contributions aren't valued. Epictetus, who endured cruelty as a slave, advised, when someone speaks harshly, imagine them as a child handing you a rotten apple. Would you take it? No, so why take their bitterness? This isn't about excusing poor behavior. It's about recognizing that hurt people often hurt others. By understanding their struggles, you disarm their words without diminishing your own strength. Try this reframe the next time criticism stings. Visualize the critic not as a villain, but as someone wrestling with their own unresolved battles, the boss who micromanages. Perhaps they're terrified of failure, the internet troll spewing venom, likely starved for attention or control. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice." In other words, respond to their pain with clarity, not more pain. This shift doesn't just neutralize the attack, it transforms it into a mirror, reflecting back the universal human struggle for validation and peace. Here's the challenge for 1 week: practice Stoic empathy. Each time someone critiques you, pause and silently ask, what might they be protecting or proving? You don't have to voice this insight, just hold it in your mind like a lantern. Watch how it changes your reactions. That snide remark from a relative might soften when you consider their own unmet expectations. The passive-aggressive email from a coworker might sting less when you spot their fear of irrelevance. This practice isn't about becoming a doormat. It's about rising above the fray with the quiet power of understanding. The Stoics knew something profound. When you stop seeing critics as adversaries and start seeing them as fellow travelers, flawed, fragile, and fighting their own battles, their words lose the power to destabilize you. Because empathy, at its core, is an act of strength. It takes courage to look beyond the insult and see the human behind it. And in that space, you'll find something remarkable: the freedom to walk away unshaken, not because you've defeated your critics, but because you've understood them. And understanding, as Marcus Aurelius reminds us, is the beginning of true resilience. criticism comes in two flavors, one that builds and one that breaks. The Stoics didn't just recognize this difference, they built an entire framework around it using virtue ethics. Picture two farmers approaching the same tree. One prunes dead branches to encourage growth, the other hacks at the trunk out of spite. Both are wielding blades, but only one understands their purpose. Seneca put it plainly, the wise man welcomes truth no matter its source. That's the litmus test, not who delivers the critique, but what it carries. Does it align with the four cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance? If so, it's constructive. If not, it's just noise dressed as feedback. Let's break this down with Stoic precision. Constructive criticism is rooted in wisdom. It's specific, actionable, and aimed at improvement. Think of a mentor pointing out a flaw in your business plan with data to back it up. Destructive criticism, on the other hand, is vague and personal, like a coworker muttering, "You'll never get this right." The first offers a roadmap, the second is just a roadblock. Next, justice. Does the critique serve a greater good, or is it just serving someone's ego? A coach correcting your form to prevent injury is practicing justice. A rival mocking your performance is not. Then there's courage, the willingness to hear hard truths without flinching. Seneca praised the man who could say, "Prove me wrong," because it took bravery to prioritize growth over pride. Finally, temperance. Constructive feedback is measured, like a surgeon's scalpel. Destructive criticism is reckless, like swinging a scythe in the dark. Imagine applying this as a flowchart in real time. Someone critiques your work. First question, does this align with wisdom? If it's specific and evidence-based, proceed. If it's a blanket insult, discard. Second, does it aim to uplift or undermine? Third, does it require courage to accept? Discomfort isn't a red flag, it's often a sign you're on the verge of growth. Fourth, is it tempered? Even valid feedback loses value when delivered with cruelty. Marcus Aurelius modeled this when his advisors contradicted him in court. Instead of silencing them, he'd say, "Speak plainly. If your words are true, they're already mine." That's the Stoic ideal. Truth belongs to no one and everyone. Now consider the critic's motive. A Stoic would say destructive criticism often says more about the giver than the receiver. Picture someone shouting at a mirror. Their anger reflects their own fractures, not the glass. Seneca wrote letters to friends who'd been slandered, reminding them, "The wound is only as deep as you let it be." Constructive criticism, by contrast, is like a compass. It might point north, but you're the one holding the map. Here's the practical takeaway. Next time criticism lands, don't just react, analyze. Ask, which virtue does this serve? If the answer is none, treat it like static on a radio, noticeable, but not worth tuning into. If it passes the test, welcome it like a Stoic would, not as an insult, but as an invitation to refine your character. Because in the end, the value of criticism isn't determined by the mouth that speaks it, but by the mind that receives it. And a mind trained in virtue ethics, that's a mind no petty words can shake. Cleans, the Stoic philosopher who carried water by night to fund his studies, left us a simple but profound metaphor. The fist must open to receive. Picture that for a moment. A hand clenched tight cannot accept anything new, whether it's a gift, a tool, or even a breath. This is the heart of the Stoic pause, creating space between stimulus and response, between criticism and reaction. Ancient texts describe Cleans practicing rhythmic breathing as he hauled his water jars, using each step as a metronome for his inhales and exhales. He wasn't just building physical endurance, he was training his mind to stay open even under strain. Here's how to put this into practice today. When criticism lands, whether it's a cutting remark in a meeting or a dismissive comment online, freeze. Not in fear, but in deliberate stillness. Inhale deeply for 4 seconds, feeling your ribs expand like a bellows filling with air. Hold that breath for another 4, letting the oxygen saturate your bloodstream. Then exhale slowly for 4 more, imagining tension leaving your body like steam from a kettle. This 12-second reset isn't just physiology, it's philosophy in motion. Those 4 counts mirror the Stoics' 4 virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, temperance, each breath a silent recommitment to your principles. Marcus Aurelius described this space between trigger and action as the gap where freedom lives. That pause is where you reclaim agency. Picture a courtroom where your knee-jerk emotions are the prosecution, but your breath summons the impartial judge, your rational mind. Someone insults you, the pause lets you ask, is this true? Does responding serve my character? Epictetus, who praised Clean's techniques, taught that no one is master of another's judgment, but we are absolute rulers of our breath. Those seconds of intentional breathing create a buffer zone where external words stop being commands and become mere data points. Try this now, don't wait for criticism to strike. Practice the 4-4-4 breath 3 times today, once in the morning as mental armor, once at midday as realignment, once in the evening as reflection. Like Clean's water jars, you're carrying the weight of daily life, but with each mindful breath, you're also carrying an ancient tool, one that turns moments of tension into opportunities for growth. Because the real power of the Stoic pause isn't in avoiding reaction. It's in choosing the response that aligns with who you aspire to be, and that choice, like the opening of a fist, begins with release. Real confidence, the Stoic kind, doesn't announce itself with swagger or bluster. It's quieter than that, more like the steady hum of a well-tuned engine. The ancient Stoics modeled a unique blend of self-assurance and humility, rooted not in ego but in an unshakable commitment to virtue. Picture a mountain. It doesn't need to proclaim its strength. Its presence alone commands respect. That's the essence of Stoic confidence. It's not about proving yourself to others, but about aligning your actions with principles so deeply held that no outside opinion can shake them. Marcus Aurelius embodied this daily. As emperor, he wielded immense power, yet his journals reveal a man more concerned with self-improvement than self-promotion. He wrote, "It's ridiculous to avoid what others think of you while still valuing your own thoughts too highly. That's the balance, neither shrinking from criticism nor inflating your own importance." Contrast this with ego-driven confidence, which is brittle by design. Ego clings to praise and crumbles under critique because it depends on external validation. Stoic confidence, though, is anchored inward. Think of it like a tree with deep roots. Wind might shake its branches, but the trunk remains unmoved. Epictetus, who was mocked for his physical disabilities, taught his students, if someone calls you a donkey, don't argue. Just ask yourself, am I acting like one? If not, their words are meaningless. That's the litmus test. Confidence rooted in virtue cares about truth, not trophies. It's the difference between a leader who listens to constructive dissent and a tyrant who silences all opposition. One seeks growth, the other only validation. Here's a practical way to channel this. The next time criticism lands, pause and ask, how would my Stoic role model handle this? Maybe it's Marcus Aurelius, who faced betrayal with calm resolve. Or perhaps it's Cato, who wore his outdated cloak like armor against ridicule. Imagine them standing in your shoes. Would they bristle at the insult, or would they weigh it with detached curiosity? The exercise isn't about imitation, it's about aspiration. By modeling their composure, you're not suppressing your feelings, you're elevating your response. Seneca, when attacked in the Senate, would often smile and say, "Let's examine that claim together. No defensiveness, no counterattack, just an invitation to dialogue." That's confidence without arrogance, the ability to engage with critics without surrendering your peace. Now, apply this to modern scenarios. A coworker undermines your idea in a meeting. Ego might push you to interrupt or retaliate. Stoic confidence, it lets you lean back and ask, what part of their feedback could make this stronger? The difference isn't in the words you choose, but in the mindset behind them. One comes from insecurity, the other from self-possession. The Stoics knew that true confidence isn't threatened by critique, it's refined by it. Like a blade tempered in fire, it becomes sharper through friction. So here's the challenge for 1 week where your confidence like a Stoic would lightly, without fanfare. When praise comes, nod and move on. When criticism follows, meet it with the same even temper. Not because you're indifferent, but because your worth isn't up for debate. After all, the mountain doesn't answer to the wind. It simply stands silent and sure, knowing its strength needs no announcement. Morning reflection is your first line of defense against the chaos of criticism, a quiet ritual to armor your mind before the day begins. Marcus Aurelius started each dawn with a simple question. What virtue will I strengthen today? Try this modern twist. As sunlight hits your window, take 3 minutes to name one trait you'll lean into: patience with feedback, curiosity toward dissent, or grace under fire. Write it on your phone's lock screen or a sticky note. This isn't about lofty goals. It's about priming your focus like an athlete visualizing the game. Epictetus, who trained students in the art of resilience, urged them to let your first waking thought be, "Today I meet interference, not as a threat but as a training ground." Evening review transforms criticism from wounds into wisdom. Seneca ended his days interrogating his own behavior. Where did I react poorly? Where did I grow? Imagine applying this to feedback you received. Grab a notebook and divide the page into 3 columns. What happened? The raw critique. My reaction. Did you bristle or breathe? And the lesson, not what they said, but what you learned. This 5-minute audit isn't self-flagellation, it's strategic refinement. The Stoics called this melite, the discipline of deliberate rehearsal. Over time, you'll spot patterns. Maybe defensiveness flares when your competence is questioned, or you dismiss valid points from certain people. Awareness alone softens those edges. Epictetus students tracked progress in wax tablets, etching small wins. Today, I listened before rebutting. Your version. A weekly criticism post-mortem. Every Sunday, revisit 3 critiques you faced, not to relive the sting, but to measure your evolution. Did the colleagues barb about your presentation style lead you to practice vocal exercises? Did the online trolls jab reveal a need to thicken your digital skin? Progress, as Epictetus reminded us, is like a tightrope walker. Each step matters more than the applause. Perfection is a myth, refinement is the mission. Here's the key. These practices work because they're microdoses of mindfulness, not grand overhauls. A morning intention takes less time than brewing coffee. An evening review fits between brushing your teeth and turning out the light. The weekly post-mortem, shorter than scrolling through social media. Stoicism was never about dramatic gestures. It's the accumulation of small, steady choices that build unshakable resilience. Like a blacksmith tempering steel, each intentional reflection makes you harder to break, and over time you'll notice something remarkable. Criticism stops feeling like arrows to dodge and starts feeling like breadcrumbs guiding you forward. Consider Ryan Holiday, the modern author and strategist who's brought Stoicism to millions through books like The Obstacle is the Way. When critics dismissed his work as pop philosophy, he didn't fire back, he leaned into the label. If making ancient wisdom accessible is a crime, he quipped, I'll happily plead guilty. Holiday embodies the Stoic art of sympatheia, recognizing that critics often project their own insecurities. His mantra, I don't have to attend every argument I'm invited to. This isn't passive avoidance, it's strategic detachment. Picture a chess player declining a pointless sacrifice. Why waste moves on battles that don't serve the end game? Then there's Admiral James Stockdale, the Vietnam POW who survived 7 years of captivity by channeling Epictetus. Beaten and isolated, he faced relentless psychological attacks from his captors. Yet his stoic discipline turned their taunts into fuel. They can cage my body, he'd repeat, but my mind remains free. Stockdale's approach mirrors Marcus Aurelius' journaling, externalizing pain to rob it of power. When interrogators mocked his rank, he'd silently add, and yet I still choose integrity. His story proves criticism's bite dulls when you refuse to let it define you. Look at Serena Williams, whose career faced scrutiny from every angle: her physique, her intensity, even her motherhood. After a controversial umpire call cost her a Grand Slam match, reporters baited her for outrage. She responded with icy clarity, I've seen worse, I've survived worse. That's Stoic apatheia in action, not emotionlessness but emotional sovereignty. Williams' default to perspective, this isn't my first storm, echoes Seneca's advice. We suffer more in imagination than reality. What do these modern Stoics share? A refusal to let critics draft their self-worth. Holiday rereads Epictetus in Kyridion before media tours. Stockdale mentally rehearsed torture to inoculate against fear. Williams visualizes setbacks as waves. They crash, then recede. Their tools aren't complicated. A pause before reacting, a filter for useful truth, a mantra to recenter. The lesson isn't that they're immune to criticism, but that they've made it irrelevant to their mission. So when tough feedback comes, borrow their playbook. Ask not, how do I defend myself, but what would Ryan Holiday bookmark here? Imagine Stockdale's voice reminding you, this too I can endure. Or picture Williams' steely gaze as she serves past the noise. Their examples prove Stoicism isn't about silencing critics, it's about outlasting them with the quiet confidence of someone who's already won the only battle that matters, the one within. Let's bring this all together. You now have a Stoic toolkit for navigating criticism with unshakable calm. First, perception. The realization that criticism is just an external event, not a verdict on your worth. Like a ship's captain reading the wind, you decide whether to let it fill your sails or let it pass. Second, the pause, that crucial breath between stimulus and response, where you reclaim the power to choose logic over reaction. Third, journaling, turning critiques into raw material for growth, just as Marcus Aurelius did under candlelight. And finally, Amor Fati, the radical embrace of every critique as fuel for your evolution, knowing that even the harshest words can sand down your rough edges into something stronger. But here's the thread that ties it all together. Real confidence doesn't come from silencing your critics. It comes from anchoring yourself so deeply in your own virtues that no outside opinion can shake your foundation. Think of it like this: if your self-worth is a building, external validation is cheap paint that flakes off at the first storm. But internal virtue, that's steel framing. It doesn't need constant touch-ups because its strength is in its structure, not its surface. Seneca put it perfectly. No wind is favorable if you don't know your port. When you're clear on who you are and what you stand for, criticism becomes just another gust of wind, something to adjust to, not something to fear. So as we wrap up, here's my challenge to you. Pick one Stoic tool from today and test it this week. Maybe it's the morning intention ritual, or perhaps the evening critique audit. And remember, growth isn't about perfection. Even the Stoics stumbled. What mattered was that they kept returning to their principles like a navigator recalibrating by the stars. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below sharing your own Stoic hacks for handling criticism. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff? What's your go-to mantra when words sting? Because the beauty of Stoicism is that it's not just a philosophy, it's a conversation, one that's been unfolding for thousands of years, and your voice. It belongs in that dialogue, so let's keep it going. Until next time, remember, the world will always have opinions, but your calm, your confidence, your character, those are yours.